Hello everyone for this new author book fair. So we already had one in last September where we met amazing local author, but today is a very special one because we are organizing this event to celebrate International Women's Day 2022. So the actual day is next Tuesday on the 8th of March, but in anticipation of that and also because of timetable. We have gathered today 5 amazing authors with very different takes on women's stories. So I hope you're as excited as I am. If you don't know me, I'm Marion. I work for Kingston Library Service. And today I will be chatting with these 5 amazing authors. So at 10 a.m. in just a few minutes, we'll welcome Kate Muir that will talk about her book, Everything You Need to Know About the Menopause, but We're Too Afraid to Ask. Then we'll chat with Faye Brann about her award-winning comedy/thriller book called Tinker Tailor School Mom Spy, the story of an ex-spy, now the perfect suburb mom. On a very different take, at 11 a.m. we are delighted to talk with Natalie Haynes about Pandora's Jar, and she's doing an amazing job at reframing classic stories from the point of view of women. Then we'll travel all the way to Russia and talk with Ellen Apsteen and her book, about her book, the Tsarina's Daughter, and the incredible lives these women had. And finally, our last author today is Kate Thompson. We'll chat about her latest book, The Little Wartime Library, which was released just a few days ago. And it is a true story of an underground library in Bethnal Green during World War II. So if you want to read any of the books, you can borrow them from our library branches. You have our opening hours on our Facebook page. And some titles are also available as ebooks. If you will wish to buy a copy of the books presented today, we would encourage you to support your local bookshops, such as the Regency Bookshop in Surbiton. And if you have any questions for the author, please feel free to write them down in the comment section of the video. We'll have some time at the end of each chat to reply to them, so feel free to ask any questions you could have. So now what we'll do is I'll just leave you with Kate bio, and we will see you in just a few minutes. Thank you. Hi, Kate. Hello. It's so nice to meet you and to talk about your book, Everything You Need to Know About the Menopause. So, I think the first question I will ask is the same question I ask everyone is, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what book you have written?
Yeah. Well, I've written a kind of myth-busting guide to the menopause, and it's also busting all the wrong science that women have been taught for years and years and years. And we've been radically misinformed. And actually, the book came out of a documentary I was making for Channel 4 with Davina McCall about the menopause. And my own menopause experience was such a disaster. It wasn't just, a car crash. It was the full-on Thelma and Louise, hormones off the cliff. And I'm a coping person, and I'm a person who Googles, and I couldn't find out the information I needed. And I just thought, I don't want this to happen to any other women. I want women to know the truth. So that's how the book began. And I'm an investigative journalist. And then I started making the documentary, and lockdown came. They shut down the documentary, took all the money back. And we were sitting there in the dark thinking, what am I going to do? So then I rang every single scientist around the world, from Australia to Yale to California. And I interviewed them all about the menopause in a way that I would never had time to do. And then I found out what women really needed to know from all that information. So there's some really radical, quite revolutionary knowledge in the book, but I've tried to make it for people like me and not for scientists.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, yeah, I guess, yeah. So how was your research process? So you just mentioned you called all the scientists that you could find. Did you also interview women about their experience, or is it really more asked around the medical side of it?
No, it's full of women's real life stories. A lot of the women are my friends. And one of the stories in the book, which I think is key to the book, and one of the reasons I started this whole menopause campaign, was I went to a doctor who eventually helped me get HRT. And then she started telling me a story about another woman. Now, this doctor was Louise Newson, who is probably the most famous menopause doctor in Britain and has the biggest clinic in the world with 80 doctors and a whole research institute. So she really, really knows her stuff. Anyway, she told me the story of this woman, a nursery teacher, who had been diagnosed with depression in her mid-40s. And they tried every single kind of antidepressant. She just got worse and worse. She'd had urinary tract infections. She felt terrible. She couldn't get out of her chair. And she'd been a bright, intelligent nursery teacher with no history of that kind of depression. And eventually she was sent for 12 sessions of electroshock therapy at a mental hospital and sent back home because they couldn't treat her depression. Anyway, she felt really, really that it was coming to the end, and she started Googling and she found out about hormonal depression. And then she realized that Dr. Louise Newson's clinic existed, and she was treating some women with hormone replacement therapy for depression because it was low hormones giving them depression and not anything else in their lives. And she was terrified to leave home because she was sort of agoraphobic with the depression. So they mortgaged their house, they bought a camper van, and they drove to Louise's clinic, which was over 100 miles away. And the woman came out of the camper van feeling safe about where she was, ran into the clinic, got HRT. And a week later, after 7 years at home, she went out and walked her dog. The HRT had that amazing effect on her brain.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I realized that menopause was not really about hot flushes. It was about women's mental health. And it's about what hormones do in your brain. And the sooner we explain that to everyone, and that every woman knows that and tells their story, then I think the better the world will be.
Yeah. Wow, that's really, really interesting. Is there anything that came out as a huge surprise when you did your research, something that you didn't anticipate at all? Because I suppose you had a little bit of knowledge, or at least interest in the subject before you started writing the book. But is there anything that was really like a huge discovery? Or
Yeah, the most wonderful thing, and it's sort of a gift that's only opening up to women, is that I started, because my mother had died of Alzheimer's and I'd watched her brain decline. And, that's an awful thing, because an Alzheimer's is not just about the person, but everybody around them, kind of goes through it with them. Yeah. And I was very aware that in my early menopause, there was a problem with my brain. And I was sitting there about the age of 50, writing a shopping list. I wrote, I must shave my legs. And I wrote down shaver. And I thought, no, there's another word for that thing. And about half an hour later, I remembered it was the word razor. Now, that had never happened to me in my life. I had never forgotten a noun.
Oh, wow.
I was a film critic at the Times. I was remembering 350 films a year and who directed them.
Yeah.
So I knew this was, I was really, really upset. And at that point, I'd gone to my doctor and they'd said, oh, you're fine, you don't need HRT, just get on with it, blah. They were just not helpful at all. And I couldn't quite explain what was wrong with me. Anyway, I went privately because I was not getting help from the NHS. And that was a bit of a muddle, and I don't really want women to do that either. But anyway, I eventually got HRT, which includes estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, rather importantly, are 3 female hormones. Worth remembering that testosterone is a female hormone too. So I went and got that. And about a week later, just like the woman who, had the hormonal depression, my memory came back. I wasn't forgetting any nouns. I could talk like this, for a very long time without forgetting things. And I realized, oh my God, this HRT has had a huge effect on my brain. And at that point, I started doing later on more and more research. And not many people have done this research, because it's all new. And there are 2 women in America, obviously they're women. It's International Women's Day, and I really would like to celebrate these 2 scientists because they're going to make a huge difference to women. And one is called Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who wrote a fantastic book called The XX Brain, which is all about estrogen in the brain and how the brain changes in menopause. And she's in New York, and there's another scientist at Arizona University called Dr. Roberta Diaz-Brinton, who has studied the effect of estrogen on Alzheimer's growing in the brain. And the amazing thing Dr. Brinton has done is she's gone and found the records of 400,000 women who are their insurance records, and approximately half of them were on HRT and the other half were not. The ones that were on HRT, particularly the new transdermal HRT, that you rub into your skin, they were 73% less likely to get Alzheimer's and dementia.
Oh, wow.
So obviously, estrogen is doing something, we don't quite know what, to protect your brain from the decay and the amyloid plaques that come with Alzheimer's. Basically, estrogen is, it's like getting plaques on your teeth. Basically, you're keeping your teeth clean so your teeth don't rot, and the plaques in your brain, you don't want those Alzheimer's plaques growing in your brain. And they don't really seem to grow in the brain of women who are replacing their estrogen and possibly testosterone too. We don't know about that. And they've done these studies I was ringing people, further investigating this, I was ringing people who were doing terrible things to mice, in Wisconsin, and they have an Alzheimer's mouse that they give Alzheimer's to, that they're testing things on. It's all not very nice, but they found that when the mice had estrogen, they were fine. And when the mice did not, they tended to get lost in mazes. And I was just like, oh God, that is so sad. But obviously we do not want to be lost in the maze. I'm a daughter of Alzheimer's. I don't want to grow up to be like my mother and suffer like she did. So I am going to stay on estrogen for life. And I started investigating that. That was my next bit. So I'm interviewing people who are 85 on HRT. And one of the women who commissioned the program, Dorothy Byrne, who was the head of news and current affairs at Channel 4, was 69 and leaving Channel 4 just at the end. It was the last program she commissioned. She was like, I don't commission this. And she said to me at the end of the program, she said, do you want to see, maybe I should get some HRT. And I said, okay, why don't you go and try this and this? And she went and got it, and she rang me about a week later, and she said, I've slept through the night for the first time in 10 years. She said, I had no idea. I had no idea you could sleep through the night. And, that makes a huge difference to women. Just sleeping. Sleep is so important in our lives, in our concentration. And, I know you're much younger, Marion, but we are all mad, multitasking people. We've got teenagers, we've got jobs, we've got aging parents. We're a bit mad, all that together. It's at a certain point you get very, very tired. And if your body and your mind are not working as they should, and you've got a full-time job, it's really difficult to keep all those balls in the air,
Yeah, and the energy levels are really diminishing fast, I suppose. That's really, really interesting, and it's an interesting new take on menopause. And so thank you for doing all that work. Hopefully a lot of people will read the book and learn more about it.
I think it's interesting too, as not merely just as a technical medical thing. And one of the things I do is try and tell stories about sex and fun. And, I interview a woman who has moved to a cave in the sort of Mojave Desert, and is writing there, and is an expert on sex and sort of orgasm. And, we talk about kind of orgasm after menopause and how we should have plenty of them, because there's these polls which show approximately 50% of women find their sex life basically goes down the hill after menopause, because they get dry vaginas, dry vulvas. Because if your face is drying out from lack of estrogen and you're putting Chanel on it, that's fine. But what are you doing for the rest of your body? We can easily put safe vaginal estrogen on our vulvas and keep them going. And she was just talking about how you don't want to stop having orgasms after 50. I mean, you can if you want, and you can go and do gardening, but you can have sex by yourself, you can have sex with someone else, you can have sex with a variety of people, and the idea that should go away after we're 50 is really sad, because it's such a joy. And that women died, and we're the first century of women to have menopause seriously, because women died at 59 in sort of 57, 59 in Victorian times.
Yeah.
So basically they stopped breathing when they were, oh my God, thank God. And they had a couple of years having a drink and then they were dead. But now we're going to live 50 to 83 on average, 83 on average. So a lot of us will be in our 90s.
Yeah.
So you've got to think, what am I going to do with my next 30 years? And what am I going to do that's going to do good in the world? And, you know, if my health is good and if I am strong and if I'm on the new, much safer HRT, no risk of breast cancer over 5 years, you know, it's a completely different potion from the last kind.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important to say, that transdermal HRT and the new body identical HRT is a copy of your own hormone. So it's not going to do the evil things that the big pharma pills in the past did. And then I was thinking about women in later life and how many women there are in later life who are performing at a really high level. And we've been looking at surveys for the program, and about 10% of women are dropping out of their jobs in their late 40s, early 50s. That's 10%.
Oh, wow.
That's a huge amount.
Yes.
And kind of 50% of nurses are over 50. And a third of them want to leave their jobs right now, probably more, because they've been through such a lot.
Yeah.
And you think, you get rid of a nurse at 50, you can't replace it with a 22-year-old nurse, because you've got all those decades of experience and intelligence and empathy. And the idea, you know, you're not just losing, you know, £20,000 worth of training, you're losing £50,000 worth of training when that woman walks out because she's done all those extra years of stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, it is bonkers. It's bonkers economically for women to disappear, just as they've stopped looking after lots of children. And when they can give their whole energy to really doing good in their jobs. And, you know, I was just looking at the politics we're living in just now. And, you know, here's Putin, who's 69. Here's Biden in his 80s. You know, there are all these older men, you know, Trump really old, all these older men running our world. And you think, where are the older women and why aren't there more older women? And I was thinking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the fantastic, you know, judge in America, who went on the bench until she was, I think, 87. And, you know, there was a woman whose testosterone was still running at that point. And I just think, where are the older women in the boardroom, in politics? I mean, there are more, but we should be there. We should have 69-year-old women storming around, you know, looking after us. And, you know, you've got Ursula von der Leyen, you know, in the EU and things like that. You do have these women up there, but we need more. And I also feel, you know, would we, you know, would we be bombing women and children? Would we be doing that? You know, so that, you know, I'm not, obviously not all women are wonderful, but I'm thinking on Women's Day, you know, what if we ran the world and what if older women and their wisdom and their time really mattered? Yeah. So for me, providing this health avenue to make it easier for the women who do struggle with menopause and really need help. And it's obviously clear that 10% are in a really bad way if they're walking out of their jobs. So just getting the message out there.
Well, thank you for that. That's really cool.
Can I talk about France, because you're French?
Yes,
can I tell you
course.
One of the great things? I didn't realize Marion was French because I'd only been dealing with her. But the best menopause research on HRT has been done in France just over 10 years ago. And they tested the different kinds of HRT. And basically, there's one called body identical, which is micronized progesterone, which is a copy of your own progesterone, exactly the same molecule, and transdermal estrogen, again, a copy of your own molecule. And it's made from yams, synthesized from yams. The other stuff, which they tested 20 years ago in all those, you know, HRT will give you breast cancer trials in America, was made out of synthetic progestins and estrogen derived from horse urine. Okay, so think about that. You're 12 years old. Do you want your mum to take the estrogen and the horse urine and the synthetic chemicals, or would you like her to take a copy of her own hormone? And I mean, even a kid could tell you those are very different options. And the French did this fantastic trial with lots and lots of teachers over years and years and years, many of whom were on HRT, and the ones who were on the body identical hormones did not get any breast cancer over the first 5 years. And they continued the study for a while. There might have been the occasional case after 10 years, but really it looks like it's a fantastic option for women. They live longer if they're taking it, and it stops them getting osteoporosis. It's going to help with Alzheimer's in the brain. It helps with cardiovascular disease. It helps with diabetes. It's basically, your kind of human juice is back. And if possible, you want to hang on to it. And I've also got a bit in the book about for women who've had breast cancer who can't necessarily take hormones. And there are a lot of new solutions coming in for them. And there might be things that will send estrogen specifically to the brain, but not the breast, specific kind of pills. So there will be a change in that. And, and in the meantime, the best thing to do for all those people is to take exercise. Half your rate of cancer, half the rate of it recurring. So, we've got some solutions, but I just feel we need to talk about them very, very loudly.
Yeah. No, it's something that is not in the general. I think there's a lot of misconception about menopause in general anyway, even without going into the medical side of it. So it's good to talk about it and to open the conversation, because I think there's also a lot of maybe not taboo, but a lot of unsaid things about growing old, and you were talking about sex life of older people is something that we absolutely don't talk about. So it's really, I think it's really important to talk about it and to open the conversation.
In Hollywood, Britain is fantastic. Davina McCall has talked about her menopause. Politicians like Caroline Harris MP have talked about their menopause and campaigned. We have, newsreaders like Kirsty Walker have talked, Mariella Frost, and we've got like a fantastic campaigner, Karen Arthur, who does the Menopause Whilst Black Instagram. We've got this kind of public army of women talking very confidently and knowingly about the menopause. You look over to Hollywood, and I was just in America last week starting research on the American version of my book. Total silence from Hollywood. And you think all these women in their 50s with all their Botox who are being interviewed about how fantastically young they look and how wonderful they are. And, and you just think, oh, please, one of you, just be honest and say, you're taking hormone replacement, it's really helped you, or you're not taking it, but this is what you're doing. And that menopause, is nothing to be ashamed of, because every woman over 50, pretty well, or 55, is in menopause. So there's no doubt that they are all in menopause. Have they used the word in public? No. Did they say they weren't pregnant if they had a big bulge? It's extraordinary. And I think we need the culture to take that on. And, people take it on in novels. It's done sort of in novels, maybe not quite enough. But we really need a sort of public acknowledgement that this is a portal that we're going to go through, and this is going to be our next life, and if we do it well, and if we're well informed, it will be a portal. It won't be a door closing in our faces, and we will be able to do different things, and maybe have more time for ourselves or more time for other people. And I just think shutting up and panicking about ageism, I tell people my age, I'm 57, I don't care. And the idea that you would keep that hidden and be ashamed of your 57 years of experience it seems to me extraordinary,
Well, I think we have a lot of years of shaming women and having an idea of what a woman should be to get rid of, and luckily I have a feeling that we're going in the right direction at the moment, but there's still lots of things that we need to shake off and overcome, I think. I feel also that there's a trend in the medical field of focusing a lot of men's health, but not necessarily on women's health. I'm thinking, for instance, about endometriosis. I don't know if it's how it's called in English, but I know several people who suffer from that, and there's very few studies about that. So it's really important to finally look at women's health more.
We're dealing with endometriosis, with periods. Men were only interested in women's health in terms of fertility. that was the only thing they cared about, so they could reproduce themselves instinctively. That's just what we do as you know, that's how we reproduce. But we are talking, you know, two millennia of medical sexism. Yeah. And, you know, the way we are treated. And, you know, part of what's going on with HRT, I'm really interested in taking this forward too. I've been looking at what's in the pill, the contraceptive pill, and some of the really kind of dodgy stuff that's in HRT that we've now decided to avoid in HRT and take the better stuff is still in the contraceptive pill. And I think we really have to look into what the pill is doing to women. Oh, great, you know, we're not getting pregnant. And oh, great, we don't lose our jobs. And, you know, fantastic. Yeah. I absolutely get the liberation. But I think now we need to question what chemicals are going into our bodies. Why are they making us depressed? Why are they making us feel overweight? Or, you know, what are the other things the pill is doing to us? Yeah. And I think we should be looking into, you know, the chemicals we're taking into our body and picking the best, and not necessarily just what doctors dump on us because it's the cheapest.
Yeah. I think an example of how unfair things can be is, I'm pretty sure you follow that, but do you remember a few years ago when they didn't go forward with the men
pill.
Yes, that. Thank you, because there were some side effects and that were not acceptable, and every woman in the world was like, "Well, yeah."
I mean, you know, all those women. You remember sore breasts from the pill, and I mean, I just remember changing pills, and you know, and my daughter, you know, she's 22. She's been on about 3 or 4 different pills. She just came off, she won't mind me talking about it because she's very radical about it, but she just came off the pill and got a Mirena coil instead. You know, she's in a steady relationship, and she feels so much better. She just feels so much lighter, and she's been on the pill for years and years. And you just think, oh God, I mean, I'm a mum. I didn't even think about that. I didn't think what it was doing to her until it stopped doing it to her. And I do think we need to question every medical assumption around us and research it and get really solid information. I mean, the thing about doing this book is I would Google things and then I would find they just were not true. And then I'd go back to the science paper. I'd take the science paper apart and I'd find in line 23 that the entire science paper referred to HRT from 1994. That was the old crap.
Yeah.
And I realized it was utterly irrelevant to what I was talking about, which is the new stuff, which has different effects on the body. And I realized that lots and lots of doctors and even the British Menopause Society and lots of the experts on NHS are still using the old science on the old pills, which we should no longer be giving to women. And that is what's shocking. It's really sloppy science. It's science done by press releases and not by looking into the paper. And they're not that complicated to read, these papers. You know, they're about women's health and putting something in their body and what happens to them. They're not like impossible to understand once you pick up the language.
Yeah.
That's what's so shocking, you know. And I had 2 doctors read my book before we printed it to make sure everything was correct. And it's really, really important, I think, to question.
Yes, and to provide the relevant information. So thank you so much for doing that work. That's actually really, that's going to be really useful for a lot of women, I hope. I'm just looking. I don't think we have any questions from the audience. Is there anything that you would like to add before we finish this little chat?
Well, no, I just think this should be a huge part of kind of the new feminism, and you know, all the biases that we are seeing. You know, one of the interesting things I looked at in the book was what happens to trans men, and also the question of non-binary people in menopause. Yes. And there was a really interesting case in Chicago, which has been covered by the academics there, which was a man who was a dad who'd had a baby previously, but, you know, had a beard, was completely male, and he was coming into his late 40s, early 50s, I think. And he suddenly started getting hot flushes and menopause symptoms, despite having taken testosterone for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And he's a plumber, you know. So it really was, you know, embarrassing and difficult and upsetting and triggering and all sorts of, difficulties. Anyway, he went into his doctor. They gave him more testosterone. He just came out in spots. So he had enough testosterone. And then they sort of thought, well, wait a minute, estrogen is a male hormone too, isn't it? And actually, men can have a certain low level of estrogen and it's really good for them. And testosterone turns to estrogen in parts of the male body. Yeah. So they gave him back a low level of estrogen that was within the male range. His hot flushes went away. He was perfectly normal. His beard stayed. His life went back to being a male. Now, there's a thing, though. Here, women have got testosterone. Men have got estrogen. Yes. It is not binary. Yeah. And I think I'm only beginning. There's no research. There's just one case. Nobody cares. But we really, really want to find out where the crossover lines are. And, the power that testosterone has in women's brains is also incredibly important. So I think we need to question the whole thing. I think it's throw it all in the air and see what lands.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think, we will start questioning. We just have a comment saying, I really enjoy listening to you. So definitely buying the book. So yay. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, and also look out for our documentary, because we've got a second documentary coming out with Davina McCall in May. Okay. Don't know what yet. And it's called The Menopause Brain Drain.
Okay.
Guess what?
Ooh, amazing. That's exciting.
And we've got some really radical stuff in there. So yeah,
amazing. Well, we'll look out for it, and of course we'll have it at the libraries if anyone wants to borrow it. Thank you so much, Kate. That was so interesting. Thank you so much for joining us today, and good luck with your future books and the release of your next documentary.
Well, thank you for what you're doing, sort of making your library come alive as well. It's fantastic for International Women's Day.
Oh, thank you. Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Hello, Faye. It's so nice to see you today. A very different book and a very different genre from what we just saw. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you very much. Yeah. Much enjoyed Kate's panel just now. It's very
that was really interesting. So the first question I'm asking everyone is, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and the book you wrote? Because I think Tinker Tailor's Cool Mom Spy is your debut novel.
That's right. Okay. Yes. So yes, I won the Comedy Women in Print Prize in 2020, which is run by Helen Lederer, for those of you who know her, comedian and actress. And my prize was a book deal with HarperCollins. So in September of 2021, I became published with Tinker Tailor School Mum Spy. So that's been a really interesting journey. And a bit about me. I live just on the outskirts of southwest London, so I'm local, and the book is set actually in Putney, Wimbledon area. So it's it's partly set in Putney, Wimbledon, but I can't tell you where else it's set, otherwise I'll ruin it completely.
Oh no, don't do
that. But yeah, it's so it's for local people, there'll be some familiar land.
Quite close to Kingston.
Yes.
And it's interesting that your debut novel is also a kind of a comedy novel. If I understand well, it's kind of a comedy / thriller, espionage kind of vibe.
Yeah, it's a horrible genre mix-up that nobody quite knows what to do with. So I'm very lucky I won a prize. It is comedy, but it does. What I tried to do with the book is make sure that it's not just joke after joke after joke after joke. I think, when you're writing comedy, you've got to be very careful because comedy is really subjective to begin with. So what one person finds hilarious, somebody else is not going to find funny at all. And so I think it's important that when you're writing a book like this, that you've got actually some meat underneath, some meat on the bones of the book that hold it all together. And I would say, although, I've won the Comedy Print Prize and it is got funny stuff in it, well, I hope it has anyway, but it's got funny stuff in it. Really, it's more a book about the sort of underlying themes. And it's quite interesting following on from Kate this morning and her book about menopause. My protagonist is 46 years old, so she's not quite menopausal, but she is a return to work mum. She's a mum of 3 who is recalled to her former life, her former job, which just so happens to be as a secret agent. But she has all the same challenges that anybody else who's returning to work after 14 years of raising children would have, in terms of learning to juggle parenting with career, and what, you know, when sometimes things are more important but your home life is also important as well, like how to manage that, and friendships, and just sort of that lack of self-confidence that you might feel when you're first going back into the workplace, and how to manage all those things. So as well as being, you know, light-hearted and obviously slightly on the edge of reason, there are also all of those themes underlying as well, which was really important to me when I was writing the book.
Yeah, and I think that's what is beautiful with comedy, is the way that we use humor to talk about important subjects as well. So that's yeah.
And I think you know, when I started writing it, I don't think I really intended it for it to be a comedy.
Oh, really?
I wanted to write, you know, obviously I'm middle-aged, and I wanted to write books about middle-aged women. We are a huge reading you know, we're huge readers, middle-aged women. Like, we make up an enormous portion of the reading population, but we're constantly being fed books about 30-somethings falling in love for the first time, or you know, maybe slightly an older generation as well. There aren't many books that actually have middle-aged protagonists who are good at stuff. And so that sort of that was really where I started with this, was like, I want to write fiction, but I want to write it about the women, my peer group, not and for them, but also about them, and just to explore some of the things which get missed, you know, as it is. I mean, you're obviously much younger than I am, but as it is, we get ignored half the time anyway, and there's the whole, you know, becoming invisible thing as you get older for women. And I just think it's just really, really important to say, well, we're not invisible, except of course this book turns it on its head, because she uses the fact that she's invisible to her advantage, because that's her job. So that's the sort of irony of it, is the fact that nobody really suspects a thing, because she's just some middle-aged woman, mum, like a nobody really, and that proves to be her sort of most valuable weapon of all, if you like. So but that's where I started with the book, was thinking about that, all of that sort of feeling of that I'm dipping into just becoming a non-person, and writing for that generation of women, really.
I think representation is really, really important, whatever your representation is, but it's important to be able to recognize yourself in fictional characters, and identify with this kind of characters. So
I think so. And I mean, I just don't think that there's enough literature, there just isn't enough fiction out there which does, you know, have women our age as protagonists. Well, we play wives, or we play mothers, you know, we're on the peripheral, but we're not generally at the center of things. And so that was always, that, you know, that's where I started to say, when I started writing the book, that was my aim. And the fact that you know, I enjoy humor, I've got a comedy background, and so I guess that there was always going to be humor come out of it when I was writing.
That's really cool. That's really amazing. Are there any characters that are inspired by people you know in real life? Because I suppose you said that the main character is
absolutely none. No. I mean, obviously the book is set around, so the premise is that she's a 46-year-old mum of 3, and she's a stay-at-home mum. She's very happy with that life, and she gets recalled by her boss at the Secret Service to spy on a dad at the school who is suspected of illegal arms trading. And so she has to join the PTA and infiltrate the household of this dad and befriend the mum and infiltrate the household. And that's sort of the setup and the premise of the book. And so I suppose, yes, I have drawn on my own experiences. I've been on the PTA, many PTAs actually, and obviously met an awful lot of mums and people along the way. But I wouldn't say that any one character is particularly inspired by anybody. My two women in the book, Vicky, who's my protagonist, who's our spy, and Matisse, who is the French wife of the suspected arms trader. Both of them are very different women, and actually through the book, they're at the beginning of the book, Vicky treats her very much as an enemy, and then throughout the book they discover that actually they do have more in common than they thought, and they have a respect for each other, and it's quite an interesting relationship that happens through the course of those books to those two women who meant nothing to each other at the start, and then by the end mean an awful lot to each other in different ways. And I think there might be a little bit of me in both of them. And if you've read the book, not the bad stuff, but the good stuff about both of them, I like to think that there's a little bit of me in both of them. But I think really, I mean, as I say, I come from a comedy background and stage background. And so there's nothing I love better than inventing characters. And when I'm writing, I've just finished another manuscript and I'll be out and about. I found it really hard to write during lockdown because I didn't really have any inspiration. But now, having been out and about again, you hear conversations, or you're on a train or you're in a coffee shop and you hear things and you'll be like, oh, I'm having that. I'm going to have that. I'm going to use that somewhere. So I don't base it on people I know, because that would just be like, or if somebody came up to me and said, you've put me in your book, I would be like really mortified, because I would never mean to do that, and would definitely move away. But I love creating characters from like snippets of conversations that I've heard that would just inspire me to think, oh, that would really fit nice. Like, how can I round that character out now? And so yeah.
That's really cool. So you mentioned you're working on a new manuscript. Is it something that you can talk about, or what's next?
Not really very much. Okay. I'm only just finished the first draft, so it's still in its really early, catastrophic, chaotic stages at the moment. But I think the only thing I can say is it's not a sequel to Tinker Tailor. Okay. It's a different book, and it's a murder mystery. It's more cozy crime, but again, I'm just right on the edges of that, in terms of the fact that I've got my middle-aged protagonists again, and I guess it's just slightly more dangerous than a typical cozy crime might be. So, but not, hard-boiled or anything like that. So it's still quite light and quite fun to read. I'm always a huge fan of books that entertain, and books that, I'm aiming to write the kinds of books people can take on holiday with them, basically, and sit by a pool. And particularly if they're my, as I say, my peer group, that there can be children all around them drowning themselves in swimming pools, or having screaming, arguing, or whatever, and you just feel like I can just pick this book up and I can read it and just get lost in a little world for a while, and I can also put it down and deal with whatever it is I've got to deal with. And I think so that's where I'm aiming at with the next one as well.
Okay, but it's good to see that you're writing another book. That's really
yes,
really cool.
definitely want to get another one out there for sure.
Amazing. Is there any genre that you would like to explore in the future that is a little bit different from what you wrote yet?
That's an interesting one. I mean, yes, although writing a book is I mean, it takes a long time to sort of get a book out of you.
Yeah.
And I know, you know, seasoned writers will be like, oh, they'll chuck out one a year or something like that. But I think you've got to really brew on an idea for a while to see if it will work or not before you, well, for me anyway, I have to really brew on an idea first, because I'll have like, you know, I'll write down an idea on a tiny little piece of paper like this, and I'll pitch it to my agent, say, I've had this brilliant idea, blah, 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 blah. And she'll say, I love it, go away and write it. And then I'll get like 20,000 words in and think, yeah, that wasn't really an idea that's going to sustain itself in a book in 80 or 90,000 words. So I think you have to be, you know, quite careful. And you know, I like writing in this genre at the moment. I'm really enjoying it. And this was Tinker Tailor, was my first book. So I'm really keen to explore this genre at the moment. But I wouldn't preclude from writing from others in the future. And actually, I think, you know, in another time and place, I don't think the world, well, personally, I don't think the world needs dark, miserable books at the moment. Like, I think people are looking for things that are lighter to get them away from reality rather than facing it. But I think, you know, there is a time, you know, when the world's in a better place and everything, you know, writing something a bit darker might be quite fun. I must admit, when I killed my first person off in this, not in Tinker Tailor, in the book I've just written, and I was really excited that I'd sort of killed my first, done my first murder, and I was thinking like, oh, it would be really good to write something really dark at some point in time, but I'm not there at the moment, and I think, you know. Yeah, I don't think the world needs any more darkness at the moment. Sort of light and entertainment.
Fair enough. But that's what is good with this type of book, is that, again, like, you can write something really light and really uplifting, but still talk about important stuff or not.
Yeah, I don't think just because you write, I mean, you know, I think commercial women's literature, it gets a bit of a bad rap. Well, it's called commercial women's literature, like, because there's no genre that's called commercial men's literature. So I don't really. There's this huge debate at the moment of like, why do we call it commercial women's literature? But I'm wearing it as a badge of honor.
Yes, let's reclaim the term.
But I think that as she says, having gone completely blank on what it is, I think. What was the question?
I forgot.
Excellent. We're doing very well.
Perfect. No, we're talking about the fact that it's not because it's light literature that it doesn't talk about important topic.
So I think, you know, I mean, I think it's important that we recognise, and the world recognises that just because something is commercial and women's literature, commercial women's literature, doesn't mean that it's just air and fluff. You know,
completely.
A huge amount of effort goes into writing all of these books and getting them onto shelves for starters. But also, I just think like it's, you know, as writers, we do think a lot. It might not seem like it when you're reading the books, but we're whizzing through them because they're nice, quick, easy reads. We do think quite a lot about the underlying tones in books, because, and you know, I have to say, I don't think publishers publish books that don't have something in them for a reader to grab onto. They don't get published because there's got to be something to them. There's got to be something that a reader can sit down and identify with. And if it's just fluff and there's nothing there, then you're probably not reading the right book for you, because someone somewhere will not see that as just fluff and air. Someone will identify with that book. And because it just wouldn't be out there otherwise, I think.
And I think there's a bit of sprinkled sexism also in this whole bad rap that light women literature has, because it's, you know, it's a little bit like when people talk about women cocktails because they're like a little bit weaker or whatever. It's just really
colouring everything pink,
you know, like
No, I think and I think, you know, I mean, I think the Romantic Novelists Association and the romance were particularly miffed because they were missed off of the like there was was it Sunday Times or like the 100 genres or the 100 books you must read from 2021 or something, and there wasn't a single romantic novel on there. And but romance is like a massive genre that loads and loads and loads of people love to read. And it's just not considered vital or important, which of course it is. People want to read about relationships probably more than anything else. And, I mean, my books aren't romantic, and actually I very much don't write romance for the reason that I feel like there's other gaps to be filled in our lives apart from falling in love with people. I sort of believe that there shouldn't really be the be all and end all, and particularly not as you get, as you move into middle age. It's not the be all and end all. There's so many other things at this point in life which have importance. And so, it's got to be recognized that they might look fun and happy, and the colors might be all, bright and breezy and everything else, but there isn't something important to say in all of them.
No, I agree with that. So thank you for defending defending the genre. We need more people like you. Let me see if there's any questions from... No, I don't think I see any, unless there's a problem with my tablet, which is also possible. No, not that I see. Well, if anyone has questions, feel free to add them in the comments. Is there anything else you would like to talk about, or anything else you'd like to say about the book or about your inspiration?
I mean, basically, as I think I've already said it, the book's about friendships, relationships, returning to work, those aspects of parenting and juggling and trying to have it all, but doing it in such a way that, we have a lot of fun with it. And I like to think that, Vicky's a fun read and she's an adventurer. And I'd also say it's not a book just for women. Actually, I've had a few men read it who have actually come back to me and said, I was really surprised, I really enjoyed it. And going back to what we were saying about commercial women's literature, that's the problem with giving it that label, is that like men assume that it's only women that are going to be able to read these books, and that's not necessarily true either. And they could probably all learn a thing or two by reading. I mean, I had great fun writing this book. Because she was a spy, it was obviously very difficult to research because you can't try and Google anything about MI5 or MI6. Unsurprisingly, there's very little.
Weird.
In the way of material to like find out what entrance they go in at Thames House, for example, or anything. So I did end up creating a department for her, which sat in the middle of MI5 and MI6, and it was a completely different department. And that meant that I could give her completely different headquarters. I could give her completely different procedures, and a different role really to what you would see if you were truly MI5 or truly MI6. And so that was quite nice to be able to do, to invent this place where she could be, because obviously I couldn't place her in either of the other two, and so that's just been really fun to write, and I just think it's great to be able to write women into unusual places, and unusual roles, but juxtapose that with the very traditional places that you would expect to see them in as well, and have some fun with that. And I think as a writer and as a reader, I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more of women in unusual places, and challenge our perceptions of them, which I guess is what today is all about.
Because I suppose in literature and even in movies and any kind of fiction, when we think about female spy, we think of like this idea of young femme fatale, or like the Black Widow or things like that. So it's really cool to have a different take on
And actually, if you ever met a spy in real life, which you would probably never know, but they are just very normal people.
Yes,
I mean, that is actually these days they're not James Bond. These days their remit is to be able to assimilate themselves into the situations that they're in, not to stand out. And so I think it's really, it is really interesting. Like, the more you unpack it, I do love a good spy like story and everything. But not having them as a femme fatale, having them as just a normal person. I think, and I could have gone really over the top on the comedy of that and gone all Bridget Jones on it, but I actually wanted her to be good at what she did. I didn't want the humour to come from her being incompetent. That was a really important thing. Like, I wanted her to have conflict in what she was doing and how she was doing it, and not have the confidence, because I think going back into that environment, you wouldn't have the confidence. But I didn't want her to be incompetent. And that is sort of like quite a key thing through the book. And actually the next one I'm writing as well is a very similar thing. She's thrown into being into investigating a crime, but that doesn't mean that she's bad at it. And again, I think that's a really important thing. We tend to put women into roles and then make them bad at them, and then and have someone come to their rescue. And I'm just not interested in doing that at all.
When in reality, it's often not the case.
I think women are generally incredibly competent when you throw them into new situations. They seem to thrive in them quite a lot of the time. So I think, well, that's real life. Like, why would we keep making people incompetent all the time when they're clearly not, when they're in a real life situation? That's if I'm going to leave anything with you guys this morning, that's what I would say is, like, remember how competent we are.
Yes, always. And now I'm just going to look suspiciously at every mom that I know to see their spy, and a very good one.
You never know. You really never know. Yeah. We did at one book signing have someone come up to me and say, like, I am your book. And that was really, and I was like, are you? Oh my God, that's so exciting. And then she sort of bought the book and disappeared, and I was like, was she having a laugh? Like, just seeing what, like, was she just telling me she was, so that she could see my reaction, like, just as a bit of a laugh, and then go away again. And but now I will never know.
Yes. But that is a really cool encounter. We have someone on the Facebook page. It's not a question, but who says, thank you, Faye. My 12-year-old daughter said, Mom, look, it says her name's Mom. Stressed Mom, that's you. Popping it on my to-be red pie. So, yes.
I will read the book and hopefully be a little bit less stressed afterwards. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Faye. That was really, really enjoyable. I'm definitely going to read the book. And is there any last things that you would like to add before we go to our next?
I don't think so. I just think what you're doing this morning is fantastic. So have a great rest of morning, and I hope to chat to you again at some point in time. Thank you.
We will. If you want to come to the library, because I think you're quite local to Kingston. Yeah. You should come to the library for longer Q&A and meet the audience.
Oh, I'd love to do that. I would absolutely love to do that. Yeah, count me in. Cool. Definitely. Okay. Book club.
Yes. Definitely. Oh, good idea. I will send you an email.
Great. Thank you.
Have a lovely, lovely day, Faye. And
thank you. Have a lovely morning. Thank you.
See you soon for new adventures. Bye. Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for being here today. It's really a great joy to have you. We had a Q&A on our Instagram page last year or 2 years ago, and it was really interesting. I think everyone really liked it. So it's really nice to see you again.
Oh, it's nice to be back. I'm issuing a collective apology for my wet hair. I'm sorry. I went for a run. I got up too late. I went too late. I've got wet hair, everyone. I'm sorry about it. There it is. I'm just saying it. I don't own a hairdryer. We are where we are.
Yes, I think everyone will survive this terrible, terrible situation. So I think the first question I will ask you is the same I will ask everyone else today is, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and the book you wrote?
I was a comedian for a while. I studied classics at university, and I started doing stand-up comedy at the same time. And so when I graduated, I became a comedian. I was a comedian for about 10 or 11 years. And then I made a sort of sideways step into writing for newspapers, and then a sideways step into writing books. And classics was no part of my stand-up career, I can't lie, but it's always been in my writing. And I wrote a book called The Ancient Guide to Modern Life in 2010. I don't know, in 2010. Let's say 2010. And what I really wanted to do is write fiction, but there was a huge financial crisis at the time. If you remember, it was just really hard to be a first-time novelist. So it was 2014 before I could persuade anyone to publish my first novel, The Amber Fury. And then, which is a sort of modern day retelling of the Oresteia, set in Edinburgh, and also a little bit in London. And then I've just kind of been dragged gradually further and further back in time. So I've been living in the Bronze Age since 2017, when I wrote a novel called The Children of Jocasta, which told the story of Thebes. The Oedipus story is how we would probably think of it. Although obviously I focused on women because I'm, that kind of person. And then I wrote a novel which told the story of the Trojan War from the perspectives of the women of Troy, of Greece, and the goddesses, the mortals. And that was called 1,000 Ships, which came out in 2019. Does that sound true? Yes. And was shortlisted for the Women's Prize in 2020. And then I wrote a non-fiction book about women in Greek myth, which came out in autumn 2020, called Pandora's Jar. And this year I will publish a novel about Medusa, but I can't tell you what it's called until mid-March. Sorry.
Okay, so very soon. We should see.
It is really soon, but it's really, I was like,
yeah, I can imagine.
It's all I can do not to jump up and down in my chair like a child.
Keeping the secret. Yeah, I can't imagine how hard that is, but yeah, well, very, very soon. What I find really, really interesting in your writing is how you give a voice to women, because obviously history has been mainly written from men's perspective.
For sure.
How do you do your research about all these characters that are either part of mythology or fictional, but how do you make them come to life? Is it entirely coming from your imagination? Do you have any kind of materials that you take inspiration from?
Yeah, both. It just depends entirely on the woman. So sometimes a good example, I guess, would be Helen of Sparta. She becomes Helen of Troy, or Helen of Egypt, depending on the version of the story, or Penelope in 1,000 Ships. They both have, there's loads of material about them in ancient sources. So you can, the version of Helen that we meet in Euripides' Trojan Women is not very much like the version that we meet in the play Helen. Or indeed, he writes 3 versions of her, and they're all quite different. But you have options. The version of her that we see in the Iliad is full of self-reproach. The version of her that we see in the Odyssey is really powerful, quite sinister, actually, quite scary. Penelope that we see in the Odyssey is veiled when we first meet her. She's like a goddess, Homer tells us, and she's veiled. Well, goddesses are never veiled, so what does that even mean? We spend the whole poem being shown Penelope acting, which is normally how, a poet, a dramatist, a novelist would reveal that character, but often the thing that she's doing, she's been told to do or ordered to do by, a goddess, by Athene. And so it's like, well, what does she want? What does Penelope want? It's really, really hard to unpick that. And so, sometimes you have loads of sources and you can choose which bit of their stories you like the most. They very rarely, ancient sources very rarely give you a fully developed character in the way that we would perceive it, unless they have a major role in a play. It's really unusual to see a sort of fully fledged 3-dimensional novel-sized character. Because so often women are just a kind of glancing, it's like a flyby, they're there, they're gone, and so you just don't have the chance. And sometimes the only versions of them that really exist are on vase paintings or something like that. So they're visual sources rather than literary sources. And then, you have a really great idea of what they wear. Really terrible idea of what they're like, who they are. And so it's sort of a combination of hunting around for things and bits of stories and fragments of, lost plays, and looking at vases, stealing their outfits, and making it up. It's a really fun process of combining those things of research and imagination.
It's amazing. Do you have I guess you wrote about a lot of people already. Are there any characters that you would like to write about after Medusa? Do you
So
have
many.
your next project?
Sorry? Yeah, the novel after Medusa will be Medea. So that's a really sad story. I mean, they're all the stories are really sad stories. But yeah. So yeah, Medusa was it's a very sad story, and Medea will be hard too. I split my novels with nonfiction now so that I don't go crazy writing about sad women for a really long time.
It is a way to cope, I suppose.
It is.
Yeah, because you also have a background in stand-up comedy. So how much of that is, I don't want to use the term useful, but do you bring any of the process of writing jokes and humor into your writing?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think comedians and maybe poets and people who write advertising copy, we're the ones who think about the number of words more than anyone. People who write advertising copy pay by the word. Poets are always thinking about meter, and comedians know that one extra syllable can rob you of a laugh. Or change where the laugh is, or change the quality of the laugh. And so, yeah, I don't write anything for publication that I haven't read aloud. And amazing. So, and by the way, that is the one tip I'm giving you as a writer. If you want it, this is the useful thing. Read it aloud. Firstly, you'll notice things that you can easily edit to make it look and sound more professional, like repetition or typos. But secondly, if the characters feel real as you're reading them, they'll feel real to people reading them in their heads. It just is a really good way of finding it. So yeah, everything I write has been performed one way or another in this space. And so yeah, the radio shows get rehearsed in here, and the books get read and reread here. So yeah, that kind of performance background that I have, I mean, obviously it's very useful in terms of marketing a book. Nobody ever wants to talk about that side of things, because somehow it's vulgar to think about money and the service of art, but actually writers need to pay their bills just the same as everyone else. So you have to be more capable of putting yourself out there and performing than maybe people think of writing as being this sort of solitary pursuit that happens at the top of a tower. You can write that way, but it's much harder to sell a book that way unless you're already famous, in which case clearly do what you like. But it really helps if you can go out and talk to people confidently. And of course, a decade as a stand-up comic, I don't think I've ever had a book audience I was scared of. Don't test me, book audiences.
It's a challenge.
Don't all turn up drunk. Hello, having an office party of estate agents at your literary festival. No, it's fine, we're good. But yes, so it does help. Yeah,
I see. I should probably have checked that beforehand, but do you have any audiobook version of your books? And if so, are there anything that have been done differently because you're also a stand-up comedian? Is that a question that makes sense or not at all?
About the audiobooks?
Yeah.
I do. I've done the last 2. Is that true? Yes. I didn't do Amber because it needed a younger voice than mine, and that was also true of Jocasta, because Jocasta is written in has 2 narrative sort of threads, a third-person narrative whose protagonist was relatively close to my age when I wrote it, and a first-person protagonist who's a teenage girl. And it's like, well, I can't do that voice. It should somebody young should do that. But when it came to Ships had, like, I don't know, 25 different perspectives. It had loads of different voices, and it's like, well, okay, it's true, I can't do it, but nor can anyone else. So it's fine. I might as well screw it up as well as anyone. Give it here. And then Pandora's nonfiction, and that obviously is written in my voice, so that seemed like an easier fit. So yeah, I guess they are quite performed. There is no, I'm happy to say, there is no footage of me reading them, but my arms are everywhere. It looks like, you know, that, but like when you see behind the scenes footage of like a Disney cartoon voiceover, and it's like you see these comic performers and they're all arms everywhere because they're having to stand still to a mic. It's like that. It's absolutely everywhere. So yeah, because you can't fidget too much, because if you move the pages, if you touch the microphone, if you touch the table, you have to start that sentence again. You just have to. So you're kind of within this very, you know, there's something Beckettian about it. You're sort of from the waist down, you have to stay still. So your arms just go bananas. Yeah, I can't help it.
That sounds really fun. That's really fun. In terms of your future writings and your future book, are there any theme apart from Greek mythology and all these classic stories that you would like to explore? Or do you still have like a lot of material within that?
I mean, I'm under contract to write 3 more Greek myth books, so I'll be here for a while. Cool. So there's Medusa to come, then the sequel to Pandora's Jar, a non-fiction book, then Medea, the novel, which won't be called that, but I don't know what it'll be called yet. Yeah. And then another non-fiction book. So I'm busy for a really long time.
For a few years, yeah.
So yeah, when I've done those, I'm gonna have a little holiday, and then I'll see what I want to write about. But yeah, I don't know what will be on the others. I mean, I've been reading Latin since I was 11 and Greek since I was 14. So this has been part of my life for two-thirds of my life, more than that. So it doesn't seem, you know, it doesn't seem like a thing. It doesn't, as phases I'm going through go, it's quite a long one. Do you know, it's like vegetarianism. When people, you're 13, people go, oh, you'll grow out of it. And you go, I'm sure I will. Still here though. Sorry about that. So yeah, I don't know what will come after it.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I guess
I'm terrible at crossing the road. I could be dead by then. I'm not going to lie to you.
Well, let's hope not, because I'm really looking forward to all these books you are going to.
I'll try really hard.
Yeah, I think I also wanted to chat and like ask you a little bit about. I mean, I don't want to ask why are you writing about women, because I mean that's a bit of a dull question, but I think it's really interesting how when people try to write books through the prism of characters that we're not used to. And sorry, my cat is in my face and there's
show me the cat. Or will the cat just disappear if you try and do that? I long for a pet and I can't have one. Look! Yeah. Because I'm away on tour so much, so it just isn't fair to get a cat. But I have such cat envy. Look at that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wish we had a way to send cats through Zoom, but it is unfortunately not possible. But yeah, he's a very needy cat, so I will keep him here.
I could not be happier. People always go, oh, you can get an indoor cat, and you go, well, is that good for me or for the cat? You know, I'm away a lot. That cat is going to get really lonely.
It happens. This cat is not lonely.
Doesn't look like
life. I talked with another author earlier, Kate Thompson, who writes books that mainly takes place during the Second World War, through the stories of women who were on the not on the war field and things like that. And I thought it was really interesting to see. It's not really a trend, but to see new voices and new point of views on historical events that we know really well, but not necessarily through all the angles.
I mean, I think that's the issue, isn't it? We've got two irreconcilable truths. One is that women are definitely half the world. At the moment, we're a little bit more than half the world, and we've existed for ages. And two is that history and myth were historically composed by, performed for men. And that you never come across this complete clash more overtly, I think, than in 5th century BC Athens, when you have that incredible moment in Euripides' Medea, where the character of Medea, which is being performed by a man, has been written by a man, and the audience at the Dionysia, the tragedy festival, was very probably also just men, although we don't know for sure. And she's talking about how terrible it is to be a woman, and it's like, what? Wait, what? Yeah, and this was an incredibly popular play, although it came last in competition when it was first performed. It was performed throughout Greece really, really quickly after its first performance. And then, you know, it's probably the most performed Greek play now, I guess, alongside maybe Oedipus Tyrannus, Oedipus the King. And so, you know, we have this strange phenomenon whereby women are half the world, but they haven't been half the story. And so it's sort of a strange way of looking at the world, to say, okay, well, we know they were there, but let's just ignore that. And that seems to me really weird. And because it's always happened that way, I don't think people ask the question about it very often. But of course there is no reason why that should be so. It is bonkers. Who sets out to only tell, you know, half a story at most? Nobody. They just, you know, for a really long time, I think men just thought history was about men, stories were about men did stuff, but it wasn't always so. There are loads of sources from the ancient world, which was an incredibly patriarchal society, where, you know, they are focused on women. You know, Greek tragedies often focus on women. Of the 8 tragedies that survive to us intact, relatively intact, by Euripides about the Trojan War, 7 of them have female title characters. 7 out of 8, you know. So he isn't messing around. He knows that women is the world of women, the part of the world that is women, even in a war, is the part where the drama is. You know, the epic stuff is happening on the battlefield. That's fine. We've got the Iliad for that. That's men and men over and over again. There are very few female voices in the Iliad. But then when it comes to wanting to create drama, wanting to put it on a stage, then Euripides takes his attention and puts it in the build up to the war, the aftermath of the war, you know, just off the battlefield, where, you know, choices are being made rather than just instinct taking over, maybe, which I guess is what we can imagine is happening when you're actively fighting. And so I think it's just I don't even think it's a corrective, really. I think it's an addition. You know, it's like, well, why didn't we want these stories? And women have been being put back into these narratives for thousands of years, you know. So when someone interviews me and says, you know, very suspiciously, isn't it anachronistic to put women in the center of the story? You're like, well, tell Euripides, he didn't get your memo. Or tell Ovid, you know, who wrote the Heroides, a collection of letters written by the abandoned women of Greek myth to their absent menfolk. And that's a set of 15 letters, beautiful poetic letters that he wrote early in his career, probably early in his career, it's hard to date. And you know, he shows us what the big exploits of Odysseus during the Trojan War, a section of the Iliad which we call the Dolaneia, looks like from her perspective. From her perspective, it's not Odysseus being really brave, it's Odysseus not thinking about her and their son, you know, because he's taking his own life so lightly. And she's like, could you think for a minute? And so Ovid 2,000 years ago realized that this story would look different from her perspective. So how did we forget? You know, it just seems to me that these stories were always there. It's just we forgot for a while.
Or they were not told or shared as much as they should have. That's interesting. Well, thank you for reestablishing the balance a little bit.
I'll do my best.
And your best is amazing.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to add or to share before we finish this discussion.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh, people who like the radio show, it's coming back in. Natalie Haynes Stands Up for the Classics on Radio 4, also available on BBC Sounds. It's coming back in September for Series 8. We'll be recording in the summer. And the new novel is out on September 15th.
Cool, amazing. Ooh, yeah, that's really exciting. Well, we'll have it at the library, obviously, if people want to borrow it. But and soon, I guess, we'll discover the title, which is also really exciting. So
and the cover.
Ooh,
I know.
Oh, it must be so hard keeping that.
It's really hard. I'm going to get off this call and I'm just going to sit here jumping up and down. That's it. That's all I'm going to do for at least 20 minutes, and then I'll do some work.
Yeah, well, that sounds like an excellent plan. Thank you so much for being there this afternoon. That was
My
really
pleasure.
interesting. And yeah, good luck with the launch of your next book. We're all really excited at the library to discover it. And yeah, we'll see you soon for new adventures.
Oh, wonderful. I'll see you all to talk about the next one.
Yeah, let's do
Perfect.
that. Perfect. Amazing.
Right.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Bye. And yes, we are back with our next author. Hello, Hélène. It's so nice to see you. You start to become one of... Oh, sorry. I have my son on my tablet, which is not... Okay. Everything's okay. Everything's under control. It's so nice to see you. How are you doing today?
Likewise, and thank you for welcoming me for this International Women's Day. What a very important date. I mean, there are always so many things celebrated, but this is the one day that's really important to celebrate, I feel.
I concur. I mean, I'm going to start with the same question I've been asking everyone today, is just to tell us a little bit about you and the book you wrote and what you want to share about it, and then we'll go into the questions.
So, as Marianne said, my name is Ellen Apsteen. I'm an author. I actually do not live too far away from Kingston Library. I live in beautiful Richmond, very lucky to do so. And I am the author of the Tsarina series that is published by Bloomsbury Books. My debut was published in May 2020, just in time for lockdown. Yay! Every author loves that. But I mean, really, the subject of the books is just so interesting that I think I've fared relatively well. So Tsarina was the one and only and first ever novel about Catherine I of Russia, who rose from being an illiterate serf born out of wedlock to the first ruling empress of Russia. So wow, what a woman. She really has earned her place in this today. And my second novel, which I've carefully arranged here behind me, you see the Tsarina's daughter, just by chance, of course. The Tsarina's daughter, it's exactly inside what it says on the outside. It's equally the first novel about the Empress Elizabeth, and she lived the opposite of her mother's life. And so this book is actually, while her mother Tsarina is rags to riches and the rise and then not the fall, this book is about the fall of a princess and her rise towards a Romanov empress. And I loved writing both of them, and I call them my girls, as you know.
Yeah, well, actually, that's funny, because I actually really wanted to talk about that, because you seem to be really, really close to your characters, and yeah, you call them my girls, and you call them my girls on social media and things like that. And I was wondering, is it going to be really hard to let them go when the series will be finished? Because I'm just thinking about how close as readers, we can feel to book characters. And I mean, there have been some books where I really mourn the death of characters or things like that. But it must be such a much more intense experience as a writer. You research them, you really know everything about them.
Yes, one does grow incredibly close to the readers. And I once saw an interview with Hilary Mantel where she spoke about the moment she actually had to let Cromwell die. And if you look closely at the last book, The Mirror and the Light, actually the moment of his arrest and then his realization that he will be decapitated is very hush-hush, as if she hadn't dared going there. So thank God I'm not there yet with my girls. Again, sorry, I just call them like that. I probably annoy people. It's true. First of all, of course, there's an immense amount of research that goes into these books, because I perceive historical fiction, or really that journey from fact to fiction, a little bit like ice dancing at the Olympic Games. You've got the duty, and that is really getting all this historical detail right and having the framework of how they ate and spoke and dressed and traveled and housed themselves. And of course, what happened and who was where when. You must not get that wrong. But inside that framework, I like my women to move like modern women, actually. Of course, they don't speak in a way as we speak, even though I try to keep their very strong first-person narrative clean and easy to read for readers today. But it is very important that the reader today relates to them. So that is the biggest challenge. And of course, through this very strong first-person narrative, it is me speaking. I grow closer to them again, so it's unavoidable. I don't even want to think about them going away one day. So don't ask me. But whatever happens, whatever happens, I think as a writer, these books will always be at the core of my creation, even though I don't know where I'll develop it to.
Yeah, and I had another question that I immediately forgot. Never mind. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I remember. Sorry. Yeah, because I suppose it must be nice to have this little blend of fact and fiction to be able to write them as more as characters that you can more identify with. I suppose if it was purely fictional, purely a non-fiction book. Yeah,
Yes.
If it was purely a non-fiction book, it would have been more difficult to write them that way. And
it is interesting because historical fiction is the one genre that offers this triple E of entertainment and education, escapism. And there's, of course, a divide between the authors. There are authors who, there's actually a triple divide. There are authors like Robert Harris who take a real event, you know, such as in his books like Conclave or Munich, and place a fictional character there, or even Bernard Cornwell, who does it so very cleverly in his Viking series, and Sharp. Then you have the authors like now Miss English or Miss England, Stacey Hawes, who invents the whole story in Victorian England with her characters. And then you have historical fiction like mine, where I actually do not invent the character and I do not invent the setting, which makes me the most comfortable. And I have to say, I owe enormously to historical fiction. And I'm so glad that I'm given the privilege to give back now, because when I arrived, I grew up in Africa, and when we arrived back to Europe, I had such long and lonely teenage years, you know, where I was mobbed and I was not welcome because I was different, and man does not like who's different. And the only solace, and thank you to all libraries in the world, you know, Kingston Library amongst them, my only solace was going to the library literally with a washing basket. I still picture it. It was grey plastic, one of these 1990s washing baskets. And I would go to the library and just swipe the shelf clean, really, and just read everything I could find. Most of them, for instance, was Angélique or Sinoé the Egyptian, Désirée, which is one of the world's most best-selling historical novels. And I remember what these books gave me, and that I'm allowed to do something like that and write historical fiction. I'm allowed to offer that same escape and solace to other people is an enormous privilege.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really nice to see.
Yay to libraries.
Yes, yeah. Well, I will always agree with that. It's funny because the previous author I talked to, Natalie Haynes, and the next author I'm going to talk to, Kate Thompson, you all wrote historical fiction, but with very different angles. But what kind of link all of your books together is the fact that you're giving a voice to women in historical events that we know from the prism of men, but not necessarily from women. So that's, first of all, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know how important was it for you to when you started to research a book, where you really did you want to talk about the historical event, or did you want to talk about the women first, if that makes sense?
I wanted to talk about the woman first, and especially for my first book, Tsarina. She, of course, as she later became first the mistress and then the wife of Peter the Great, before succeeding him as an empress or as a Tsarina, she only existed in his mirror in a way. So almost it was like having, you know, like a plate in your hand and trying to de-thread it. And the man in this story, Peter the Great, and his events were so big that many times I literally had to place him in the corner and say, this book is not about you. Because women are the beast of burden of mankind in history. You know, what we have borne, what we have had to bear, what women still bear. I mean, who's fleeing Ukraine today? Look, it's women and children, and they only have the clothes on their body, and because their men fight. You know, it's not easy to fight, but it's equally what women had to bear through all history, and what they continue to bear is just astonishing. This psychological and physical strength, if you have to. And that is something that my heroines definitely have in spades this incredibly shocking strength. I mean, Serena always being in the battlefield, always being pregnant. It's not, even if you're not pregnant in the battlefield, then you have your period. How does that feel? What did they do? And this is equally why I chose a novel and not a flatter and drier, harder biography, because I actually wanted to ask the question, how did that really feel like? Emotion makes us human, and a biography does not convey emotion. Of course, women have huge emotional intelligence, so everything comes full circle. Could I imagine having a man once as a main character? Perhaps, but only in reflection of a woman.
Go girl.
Go girl. Exactly.
But yeah, no, that's really, really interesting, because it's what you're doing is literally giving a voice to them instead of just talking about their life and just, as you say, like giving the dry facts. It's literally hear what they thought or what you thought they thought, and hear how they felt about the event. So yeah, that's really, really interesting.
Sorry if I interrupt you. That's what I actually like about both books so much, and about a Cinderella story in general. Because if you have somebody who's right away highborn, even though their lives were only marginally better, of course you don't have that wonderful arch and that development. They don't get so much possibility or chance to actually delve into the strength as somebody who's born a serf, less than a slave, less than the dirt between a sow's claws. That was basically her value, and then rises to being the ruler of the world's wealthiest and largest realm. Or indeed her daughter, who was born to unimaginable riches, palaces of 500-600 rooms dotting the countries. Every gemstone was as big as a pitch egg, and then being really destitute, derided, having nothing to her name, and fighting it all back, or clawing it all back. I think you need this arch to really understand these women's strengths.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting and really amazing. You quickly mentioned people fleeing Ukraine at the moment, and obviously Russia is very much on the news. Just wanted to know if you could tell a little bit about how you feel about what is happening, and how was the reception of your novel on social media in the light of what is happening at the moment.
Yes, it is very good that you asked that, because it's I can just repeat what many other people say. You must draw a very distinct line between what is Russia and her beauty and her propensity to actually suffer yet again under a regime, and what were the Soviets and what is this post-Soviet regime. I mean, Putin is a KGB man. He's never stopped being a KGB man. So, and he's obviously trying to claw some sort of Soviet Union amalgam back. And even the Romanovs were the first amongst millions and millions and millions of victims. And certainly the Soviets put an end to the Russian world as they knew it. So I hope that my books will not be punished by current politics, but on the contrary, people will read them to understand Russia, to understand what is going on, to understand the Russian longing equally for the strong man that they first had in the Tsar, that they then had in Lenin, that they had in Stalin, that they now have again in Putin, even though they get much more than what they asked for, probably. Because there's the famous French sociologue that you must know, Marianne, as you're French, Pierre Bourdieu.
Yes.
The more it changes, the more it stays the same. And if there's one place in the world where that's true, that's Russia. So if somebody wants to understand actually too what's going on in Russia, I do commend them the lecture of my books, which have got nothing to do with Putin whatsoever.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, as you say, it's really important to know and understand history, and not just history and not just the fact, but also how the culture as well that transpires through characters. So yeah, that's good advice to read your book, I think.
Yes, yes, because the worst thing that can happen is banning culture. I think somebody called in the Telegraph that classic radio should not play Russian composers anymore. It's almost like in the Second World War, suddenly Beethoven and Brahms were not played. What did they have to do with Hitler? It is crazy. To a degree, Russia needs the sanctions to be saved from itself now and from Putin. But of course, sanctioning culture such is horrific.
Yeah, and like also there's also a difference in censoring things that are already existing, that are just a vector of history and a vector of culture.
Yeah.
That is,
they get pulled into this maelstrom. So I hope it's not happening, and I hope people see Russia for what she is, an immensely beautiful lady bear.
Someone on the comments just says couldn't agree more. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, if there are any questions, please ask me about writing, about getting published, I'm happy to answer anything. It is that so many people dream of writing a novel, and it seems so opaque because, we all know how to string letters together, thank God, because we've been to school. But writing a book seems so, there are just so many levels and so many steps, and finding an agent and getting a publisher. So if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them as well.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wanted to know a little bit about your process, because I suppose there's an awful lot of research that goes on before even you start to write your first phrases. So how did it work? Did you do all your research beforehand, or did you start writing or write little snippets of it while continuing your research? What's your process?
It was a blend. It was a blend of both. So I discovered actually my first girl, Zarina, when I was 13, and I read a book called Germans and Russians, just about this millennial history of these two people who are linked and divided by an intense love-hate, because no two other people have known such tragedy politically, historically. Perhaps China, you can throw China into the mix, but has equally this innate understanding for beauty and tragedy in creation. And in that book, one chapter was devoted to Catherine I or Tsarina. And even when writing, when we're starting to write, I always went back to that one chapter, sometimes leafing through that book. But then, of course, the research was vast, and I researched for a year before I dared to write the opening sentence, and really reading all the Russian classics, seeing movies like Battleship Potemkin, or there's a fantastic Dogma movie called The Ark about the 300 years of the Winter Palace, which is shot in a single take, and they just walk through the Winter Palace and meet all its inhabitants over these 300 years. And Catherine is there. She's very decisive. My Catherine is there, not Catherine the Great. Is very decisive. And equally reading Russian fairy tales, because nothing tells you so much about a people's imaginary as the fairy tales and their mythology. And that gave me actually a very interesting angle for Tsarina's daughter then, because I noticed that in the Russian spiritual world, not a single spirit is benevolent. They're all malevolent. They lead travelers astray. They steal children. They hate your house because you might have felled a tree for it. There's always something. There's always something. And so when I then found out that my heroine, Elizabeth, in Tsarina's daughter, was born in this palace that is situated next to a ravine which is said to be haunted, and there's stories of time travels, I just thought, yes. And a lot of readers said, oh, why is there this supernatural element? It's there because it has to be. It sort of transpired, the research. And equally, of course, Peter the Great brought all these reforms to Russia in his effort of westernization. But these were two worlds, an old world and a new world clashing, even the old beliefs and Christianity, the Russian Orthodox faith. And in the end, the thing that he had brought in, almost like Goethe's Sorcerer Apprentice, he had brought in the Westerners to save Russia. So the very thing he had brought in was actually bringing the country to the brink of its demise. So like a fascinating juxtaposition that runs through these two books.
Wow. Yeah, because you've been working on your girls for a long time.
I bore everybody with them.
I love the passion. It's always so nice to see. So I think you have another volume of the series in project. Am I wrong, or?
Yes, no, I'm writing at the moment. We are discussing 3 or 4. Ooh. So we have to see. All in all, I've got material for 7 Tsarina, Romanov, Rus books, that then open the door to other works. One day I would like to write like a founding myth of Europe, you know, in an effort to help combining, to help understanding. So it is work in progress. And unfortunately, I think it will be 2023 until that comes out. But the paperback is out in June of The Tsarina's Daughter with a very, very dramatic, beautiful cover. So again, Bloomsbury has done a fantastic job in creating this visual voice for my girls.
Yeah, well, the covers of your book are so beautiful. They're amazing, honestly. Yeah, and I was just about to ask if you were ever attracted to any other genre or any other subject, but I suppose you have material for years and years to come before you even envision working on something else.
I think a different genre would be difficult, if so under another name, because nowadays, if you think any artist needs to find a voice, if you're a painter, if you're a musician, you recognize Ed Sheeran right away. You see, you see here behind me, you see a Roy Lichtenstein, you know it's a Roy Lichtenstein. So, and it's the same for a writer. If you hear J.K. Rowling, you know you're getting something fantastic. If you hear James Patterson, you know that you're getting hefty crime. So it has to be the same for Ellen Alston. You have to know that you're getting meticulously researched historical fiction, a fantastic, strong woman character, precise writing, great setting, I hope. Sorry, I'm not ruling myself. This is just what I want to achieve with my writing. I want to really pull my reader in, and I want to give him something to take along. You know, our time is so valuable, the most valuable thing we have today. And as a writer, you compete all the time with the other screens, with the school run, but most of all, really, with the telephone or the computer or films, streaming services. So for people to take the time and read that book, you have to give them something back. And I feel that responsibility. So I think I'll always sell in my genre, even though just because I love it too. But I could definitely imagine moving on, you know, for instance, the fact that I grew up in British East Africa, Kenya. And that I have this Commonwealth background. I live here, I've got German family. So that too would be a fantastic material for like 100-year saga. Let's see. Let's see.
Well, let's see. Let's continue the Tsarina series. But you mentioned competing with screens and movies. Is there a wish for you to see the Tsarina come to life?
Yes, of course. Sometimes we joke about who could play Tsarina, and Ralph Fiennes would be a great Menshikov. Recently, I saw this a very English scandal about the Duke and Duchess of Argyll and the divorce, and I thought, wow, Paul Bettany, he would be a great Peter the Great later in life, you know, because he's got the size and the statue, and but it's a big undertaking. I mean, these productions are very, very, very expensive. There's a treatment out there. We're talking to production companies. If it happens, I'd be so delighted. You probably hear me shouting all the way to Cambridge.
Yes.
I stormed the library with Sarine champagne in my hand.
Well, I can't wait.
You'll be one of the girls then.
I hope it will be possible in the future, because I think it's such a visual story as well, and you know, just in terms of the costume and things like that, it's such an identity thing. It's like so obviously Russian, and it would be really nice to see that on a big screen. It would be interesting, I think.
Yeah, I hope that I live to see it. It would be stunning, really. And perhaps we can all be extras. We can all be washer maids in the camp of Peter the Great.
Oh, that would be amazing. Just looking on Facebook, if anyone has any question. I don't see any, but please add them if you have some. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about before we finish this? Any part of the book that you would like to share, or anything about your writing process or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, my writing process, I don't know. I think people imagine it's like the sort of secret sauce, which it probably is. But I see writing really, it's a profession as any other. I suppose, I don't know, when you start your working day, Marion, is it at 9 or 8:30 when you come into the library?
Sorry?
When do you start your working day?
9, yeah.
9 o'clock. So for me, the same, I bring my son to school and then walk the dog because she gets precious little attention afterwards. And then really I start at 9:30. I sit down, I open the computer. There sometimes is sort of a moment of dread because the afternoon before I might have thought about something in the story. It occurs to me, this isn't quite right. I have to give this more accent, or perhaps, drop a little hint that later makes sense to the reader, because the reader likes to be surprised. The reader is a quite capricious beast that you have to keep entertained, especially today. But the moment I actually open, and especially when I see my work from the day before, it is the most amazing feeling. It's almost as if a magic wand touches you and there is this lid opening, and I feel the story is like flowing. It's almost like this river of gold.
Oh wow.
It's very raw, sometimes very hot, very burning. And sometimes you do things that, of course, that don't work at all. But I think to anyone who attempts to write a novel, it's important to get going at all. If people ask me, how can I write a novel? Nothing beats writing it. So just sitting, procrastinating, dreaming, and perhaps one day is now. And you know what, I think, was it Martin Luther who said, the best time to plant an apple tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. So if you didn't start your novel 20 years ago, start now. Yeah. And it's a difficult line. You need a certain time. If I know I only have an hour, I already feel queasy, and I think, okay, shall I even get started? I might just amend things. So having 2 hours and take those in the day. And if it means that you have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. What a privilege to be there on your own with your character and your cup of tea and get going before the day washes over you. So, and the other difficult sort of balance you have to equilibrium you have to maintain is that you mustn't be too hard on yourself, because at the moment it's just you and your book. But equally, you have to be serious about your writing. You have to respect what you do and what you create. And if you do decide to tell other people about it, show them that you're serious. Don't say, oh, well, I'm writing, but never. Who knows? People surprise you. You might surprise yourself. And it's creation is wonderful, but creation is everywhere. Creation is not only writing a book. Creation is baking cookies. Creation is you organizing this amazing Zoom day for International Women's Day with your colleagues. So an accountant is creative. I hope not too. Lawyers are creative. So if people have this dream of writing a book, they should definitely do it. But beware, being a writer is actually a very lonely profession. Sometimes before, when my son was still in Richmond in school, I would write. And when I went to pick him up, I would realize that I had not spoken to a person in the whole day. So you have to be ready for that. You're very lonely with your work. And then when the magic happens that you do get an agent, and it is a soul-destroying process, submitting, querying, hoping, and you do get published, suddenly you're out there with hopefully a millionfold audience that is nameless and faceless, and with whom you share your creation, and who can be very, very harsh. There are places like NetGalley and Goodreads, and authors fear them. Authors fear to look at them. So it's a double-edged sword. If you think you can wield it, go and do it. You have my blessing. We have someone in the comments say really good advice for any creative pursuit, which I wholeheartedly agree with. So basically, the bottom line is start to write now, and maybe in a few years you'll be invited for one of our live stream at the library. Thanks, yeah, I'll see you then as my colleague, and I'm looking forward to it. Bon courage.
Well, Ellen, thank you so much. As usual, it's always such a pleasure to talk with you. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, we all can't wait to see more about your girls. And I'm really excited to discover the paperback cover as well. So that's going to be a treat when that happens.
Well, thank you for having me. Bye to everybody listening, and to all the women in the world.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
a journalist, but I'm also a novelist, and I'm working on a book at the moment called The Little Wartime Library. And I had started writing about this library about 2 years ago as research for my new book. So with all my novels, I try to weave some element of real life into them. And when I heard about what had happened at Bethnal Green Library, it was just too good a story not to include. And what I love about history is the surprises in history. And for me, what happened at Bethnal Green is nothing short of magical, really. So on the first night of the Blitz, so that's September 1940, a little bit, 5 minutes before closing, a high explosive bomb dropped through the roof of the Adult Lending Library, which was this beautiful glass dome Carnegie Library. And I'm sure any librarians listening to this will think, oh, you know, in a split second, this well-ordered library was sort of cast into this scene of total destruction. Now, the borough librarian was an extraordinary man named George Bale, and he had a deputy called Stanley Snape. And I think they could well have been forgiven for sort of dragging a tarpaulin over the roof and heading as fast as their legs could carry them to the nearest shelter, but they didn't. What they did was to conduct, in their words, was this extraordinary sort of pioneering social experiment that really changed the face of librarianship in Bethnal Green during the Second World War. So what they did is they salvaged as many books as they could from this bomb site, which in this case was about 4,000 books. And they took them 78 feet below ground. So opposite the library was Bethnal Green Underground, which at that stage was not actually working as a functioning tube station. It was a shelter that housed up to 7,000 people slept there nightly during the Blitz. And using a grant, I think it was about £50, which is a very cheap way to build a library, from Bethnal Green Borough Council, and probably an awful lot of goodwill from volunteers and elbow grease, they built this perfect wood-panelled little library over the tracks of the westbound tunnel of the Central Line. Now, when I discovered this, to me, it was extraordinary. I go down to Bethnal Green Underground now, and of course, everybody's standing there, and they've got their masks on, and they're plugged into their phones, and I feel like shouting, there was a library on these tracks, look up. So I started researching this library, and it's impossible to overstate what this library represented, both in terms of morale, but also in terms of solace and sanctuary to people trapped underground with, you know, all hell breaking loose above. And I spoke to this one lady who said to me, you know, Kate, when I was knitting underground, I could still hear the bonfire, I could hear the bombs dropping, I couldn't escape my fear. She said, but when I had my head in a good book, real life melted away. And I spoke to this other extraordinary lady called Pat Spicer, who's now in her 90s, a real formidable sort of cockney. And when she was 11 years old, she slept down the underground because they had bunks for 8,000 people down there. And she said, Kate, you know, I used to go along the dark tunnel and I'd go into the Little Wartime Library and I'd borrow Millie Molly Mandy. And she said that library sparked a lifelong love of reading. And that one sentence alone absolutely blew me away. And I thought, yes, this is a novel. This is a whole story. And that was really the catalyst for it. And I went along to Tower Hamlets Local History Library Archives, which is in Bancroft Road. And sure enough, George and his deputy Stanley were very thorough. They'd left copious, beautifully written memoirs of their time with this pioneering library. And there were photographs of them, you know, in their pinstripe suits, stamping books. And I suppose as I sort of immersed myself in it, I began to look at the chronology there, and I thought, well, hang on, Bethnal Green Library opened in 1922. My book's coming out in 2022. That's the centenary, and this is an extraordinary library. And I was thinking, well, why are there no events on the, you know, why is nobody talking about this? And the reasons for that sadly became all too clear. So shortly after that, I started to hear these disturbing rumours that Bethnal Green was at risk of closure and cuts and complete closure. So Tower Hamlets libraries, which are known as idea stores, I think across the board were under threat from cuts and closures. So I was asked to join a campaign to save the library, and I kind of thought, well, what can I do? What role can I do? What can I actually bring to the table to help this? So one of the things was, as a writer, I wrote about this extraordinary library and what it represented as a symbol of resistance during the Second World War, which is obviously how you found me, Paul, because I wrote about it for The Guardian. But then I thought, well, that's not quite enough. You know, I love, as a journalist, I love interviewing people. I love oral histories. I love social histories. So I thought, I know, I'll interview 100 library workers to celebrate 100 years of the library. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm about 60 interviews down, 40 to go. So if anyone's listening and you would like to share your memories with me, I would very much appreciate hearing from you. But yeah, and along the way, I've heard some extraordinary stories really from these library workers. I think the hint was when a lady called Denise, a lovely librarian at Tower Hamlets, said to me, Kate, she said, you know, if you want to see the world, don't join the army, become a librarian. I thought, well, whatever can she mean? And of course now I completely understand, you know, I understand the true nature of librarianship. And I've realized that, you know, in the way that libraries are so much more than repositories of books, librarians are so much more than people that convey information and deal with the sort of day-to-day mechanics of books. You know, they're frontline workers essentially, aren't they? I've realized that huge role, multifaceted role that they play, and that they're used to dealing with the mentally ill and the disenfranchised and the vulnerable and the lonely, and that quite often the librarian is the only person that somebody might see all day. You know, they deal with the people who fall between the cracks in society. So I've got a newfound respect for librarians completely, and I realise actually, you know, if a library is a microcosm of society, which I really believe now that it is, librarians are humanitarians. They are people that love people as much, if not more, than books, which in a way means that it's sort of part social worker, counsellor, citizen advice bureau worker. They play such a multifaceted role. There are so many stories I heard, but there are two, if I may share them, that really stood out to me, that really illustrate this multifaceted role of librarians. So I interviewed a lovely lady called Claire Harris, who's retired now, but she worked for over 30 years in the then, to some degree still now, very impoverished area of Stepney. She was the children's librarian there. And she said to me this, she said, Kate, what we lacked in funds, we made up for with our imaginations. One summer, I had the idea to make the Titanic out of lolly sticks. The kids loved it. I could see their imagination growing as it took shape. Word spread, and seamstresses from the local factory started donating old cotton reels and leaving lolly sticks and matchsticks on the library steps. More and more kids took part until it was gargantuan. 6 weeks it took us. After it was finished, I held story time under the stern and read nautical tales. You've never seen so many children so enhanced. Lots of love and a library ticket. That's all you need. And I think talking to Claire made me realise that actually a library, in a sense, is like the community living room. It's a place where people are safe to gather. And you know, that woman, she could have kicked them all out, because actually, you know, she said a lot of these children used it as, their parents used it as a de facto, you know, free childcare, basically, or a de facto creche. But she didn't. She swooped them up and she made a difference in their lives. And the other library story that I absolutely love, that made me realise actually how many librarians, if you like, are standing on the shoulders of giants. We're all influenced by the people that went before us. And this lovely lady, Deborah Peck, who's the librarian at Canning Town in East London, said this to me. She said, my old manager, Pat, was an irreverent, anarchic man in a tank top. He was what you might describe as a character, but utterly brilliant. He used to run a home round service to the elderly, the infirm, and the vulnerable, basically anyone who couldn't make it to a library. Pat understood that books were a lifeline. He borrowed an old suitcase and piled it up with books and items to evoke the past, a wireless, a Bakelite phone, old photos. On went the music, out came the books, and the memories would flow. You're never alone with a good book, he used to say. I've never forgotten him. He shaped me into the library worker I am today. And I love that. It just, to me, shows how libraries are like a big beating heart in a way. You know, they're non-judgmental, and they scoop up everybody. You know, all life and humanity washes through a library door. There are so many parallels, I think, between the librarians of World War II and the librarians of the COVID era. This is the conflict of our times. But when I looked at the way that librarians were reacting so fast, like almost overnight, to ever-changing situations, you know, building libraries over the tracks of undergrounds. You know, St Pancras came up with the first library van that promised a library to your door. And they took this library to bomb sites, to rest centres, to shelters, to barrage balloon units. Libraries were popping up in troop ships, prisoner of war camps, allotments. You know, they were reacting very fast to the times and thriving, using their creativity and their people skills and their imagination. And then I see the same thing occurring today. So when I started interviewing, you know, embarked on this quest to sort of interview 100 library workers, often as I was interviewing people, you know, they had been seconded by the council, and people were ringing around on the NHS vulnerable list, because they knew the people in that community who wouldn't have food or medicine, you know, the people that fell between the cracks, as I described it. And so they were able to prove their worth and show that flexibility and imagination and great people skills. I think library workers really have the emotional intelligence to navigate that landscape, and that's how they're able to prove and are proving themselves in this crisis, as they did, you know, during the Second World War. And And you say like what delighted you, and I think I love the sense of, you know, the sublime and the ridiculous and the unexpected, and that comes through all the time. So I spoke to a lovely lady called Charlotte Clark, who's the manager at Southwold Libraries, and she said to this to me, she said, Kate, librarians require infinite patience and politeness in the face of adversity. A love of people is as, if not more important than a love of books. And she's so right. I mean, I heard such unbelievable tales of, you know, like a librarian who sort of looked up to find a man cooking bacon and egg on a Calagas stove right in the middle of the library, like he was in the middle of a campsite, you know, didn't bat an eyelid. Another lady told me how a guy used to come in dressed in a gorilla suit and sit at the light and sit in the library quite calmly reading a book. She said no one batted an eyelid. She said he was quite happy, he just got on with it. We let him get on with it. Another lady who told me that in a very quiet rural library in Suffolk, a lady used to turn up wearing nothing but a fur coat and used to ask the librarians to source her a second-hand bidet. And so I think that you know, requiring infinite politeness in the face of adversity, I think they see all life, and that's what I loved. And in fact, one of my other favourite stories was again from Whitechapel. I was so Whitechapel back in the 80s, it had the first woman caretaker, a formidable Cockney by the name of Reenie. And someone came in and nicked the clock off the library wall in Whitechapel. But Reenie wasn't having that, not under her watch. So she ran out, she chased the thief all the way up Brick Lane, grappled him back, got the clock and returned it to the librarian. And this librarian said to me, she said, you know, Reenie used to babysit the Crays. So had that thief knew what he was taking on, he'd have thought twice. So I think libraries ensure anything but dull is the thing that I learned probably the most.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm really, really excited, and I'm really exciting to read your book. It's yeah, especially after having seen your video. It's and you know, as a librarian, of course, I'm extra excited about the book with librarians. Libraries. Do you want to? I know you touch on that a little bit in the video. Do you want to say a few words about yourself, what you wrote, and who you are? And
yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for having me on. I've been a long time. Well, I live in East Molesey, so not so far. I was born and raised actually in East Molesey, and now I live in Sunbury. So I've always had a connection to Kingston libraries. And this is why people always say to me, why then do you write your books set in the East End of London? What's your connection? And the honest answer is I don't really have a familial connection with the East End, but I definitely have a sort of emotional connection to the East End. So I've written a series of fiction and non-fiction books set in East End of London, largely during the early part of the 20th century, during the Second World War. And I'm just fascinated by social history, I suppose, and the social histories of the women I consider to be missing from the history books, those women whose stories are hidden in the shadows, who we never explore. And there's such a richness and diversity to those women's lives, particularly working class women. You know, the sorts of women I'm talking about who maybe didn't instigate history, but who were forced to react to it. So when history viewed through their eyes takes the true temperature of the time. So that's what I'm passionate about. So this book, The Little Wartime Library, is my 10th novel now. Yeah. I keep returning to Bethnal Green. I swear I must have lived there in a former life or something.
Yeah, that's amazing, because you write both fiction and non-fiction, and I'm wondering, like, do you have a favorite thing to write, or because your fiction novel really are rooted deeply in history?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
how do you make the difference?
It's funny, I've written, so all of my books bar one have been fiction. So, and The Little Wartime Library is fiction, but it's heavily influenced by true events. I always try to weave true events into the narrative, and I think that's because I'm a journalist by trade, so it's a comfortable space for me to be able to do that. But also because when I explored this Little Wartime Library, and as you've just heard hopefully in the video about what an astonishing place it was, what a symbol of resistance it came to be, but actually when I was investigating this, and I discovered it when I got chatting to this amazing old woman called Pat Spicer, who's now 92, and she told me, you know, Kate, I used to borrow Millie Molly Mandy and I'd go down the long dark tunnels with my book and I'd take it back to my bunk. And I was thinking, really? A library underground? Can she be right? Because of course, I don't know, people watching this will have all thought, you know, people sleeping underground we imagine this sort of amorphous huddle of people like you used to see in those Henry Moore shelter pictures where everybody was sleeping nose to tail. But of course, the picture of life down at Bethnal Green, which wasn't actually a working tube station at that point, was very different. It was this incredibly vibrant subterranean community. And so when Pat told me about it and I began to dig deeper and delve into that history, I realized it came with this cast of almost like ready-made, garrulous, funny, subversive characters, women like Mrs. Chumley, who was the air raid warden down there, the shelter kids that used to call themselves tube rats. Their whole childhoods unfolded below ground. You know, they were like running through the bowels of London and playing kiss chase up the tunnels, and then all the wonderful people that staffed the library, and then there was Alice and Ginny who run the shelter cafe. And so it's almost like a gift to a writer when you have this cast of characters. You know, true life is always more extraordinary than anything you can make up. So the relationship between what happened and fiction is very closely intertwined. I think what stops it being non-fiction is that I have brought my own characters to it. And I could very easily have written this as a non-fiction and it would still have been colourful. But I was thinking on this, and I think that people access the past through stories. You know, it's how we make sense of life is through stories. And so fiction is the best vehicle to enable people just to think, oh, I'm going to get told a really lovely story now, and you can just sit back, sink into the book and relax. And that's my way of sort of asking people to imbibe the past, if you like.
Wow, that's amazing.
But yeah, the only one book I did do, which was called the Stepney Doorstep Society, that came out in 2018 through Penguin, and that was actually to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of the Blitz. And because I go out and I interview all these different wonderful people, men and women, and it was my way of saying, well, actually, these people deserve a book in their own right. You know, these people, like I said, I consider missing from the history books. They really needed a book to amplify their voices and the incredible achievements that they made to the social, the cultural, the economic, the political history of East London.
Well,
it's a sort of a hybrid mix, I suppose.
Because in your books, so I haven't read all of your books, but I have a feeling that you really give a voice to women, and women that maybe we don't know a lot of history about that. Because how do you make the research about these people and these events? Because I suppose there are more records of men's achievements in history.
Always, yeah. And I was pondering this question, like, why is it that these women that I have found and interviewed, well, not found, they were always there, but the women I uncovered, why are they always missing from history books? I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that when we look at the narrative of World War II, a lot of the stories that are documented are people in uniform, you know, like the Women's Institute, the WVS, and these women whose stories I document are not in any kind of uniform, unless you count like an apron and the turban. And also they don't leave a paper trail. They're not part of any society or group. There's no institute of matriarchs, if you like. And also those societies in which these working class women operated were very matriarchal and often quite clandestine. You know, the way that they operated, you know, a lot of, you know, I always say that women in born in the first half of the 20th century, before the advent of a welfare state and that institutionalization of roles, played a massive plethora of roles to keep their communities running. Everything from laying out the bodies of the dead to birthing new life, intervening in domestic disputes, performing abortions, you know, lending money. A lot of it was never really documented because it's sort of, once we institutionalized roles in the welfare state, that life was forgotten, swept under the carpet. So that, but there's such a richness and complexity to these women's lives. So I really wanted to get under the skin of who are these women who keep their communities running. And sorry, my dog just walked in. I've been getting crushed by my dog. But yeah, I wanted to give a voice to these women whose stories aren't ordinarily amplified. I think they can be best summed up as one woman said to me, you know, she said my nan was a warrior in a wrap over apron. And I really wanted to give a voice to those women who are always in the shadows of history. And so it seemed like a good timely place. Sorry.
It's okay.
I do apologise. I'm sorry, I'm getting hijacked by my dog. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, the perils of working from home. Yeah, I wanted to give a voice to these incredible women and celebrate and acknowledge their achievements. And I think so much of it is when we look back on the past, we say, oh, well, they weren't in uniform. They were only housewives. You know, they were only factory workers. And then you delve deep and you realise they were so much more than that.
Yeah.
You know, often these women were quite integral in things like rent strikes. They stood up at the Battle of Cable Street to fight fascism. They helped take over the tubes. You know, they held down, or simply the Herculean task of raising massive families while holding down 3 jobs. You know, these stories are as worthy as documenting as any soldier or WPS worker, you know?
Yeah. I guess that's why it's so important to have a plurality of voices and a diversity of stories, because if we don't, these stories get forgotten, and that would be a real shame.
And I think we're in this period of, and this is why it's so heartening and wonderful to see all these revisionist history books being written now. Like I read recently the wonderful The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, which gave a voice to the victims of Jack the Ripper. And it's really heartening and wonderful to see these books written by, in other words, not written by middle-class white men about battles and dates. And, you know, I think history is often best reflected when you look at it off the battlefield and you see it in the eyes of the women reacting to history, and the domestic life is often so fascinating. It
is. Well, thank you so much for giving a voice to all these people. That's I think that's an important work. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been a joy. I mean, I've spent the last sort of 10 years really going, and I never set out to do it. It's only because when you go and interview somebody and you're sitting in somebody's immaculate front room and you've got a cup of tea and they're telling you this like unfiltered gush of social history that comes out, and you begin to realize, wow, all these stories that have gone undocumented, and really we do need to be recognizing these working class women's place in history, and their extraordinary achievements. So it's never been a hardship. I'm always in my happy place, if you like, when I'm sitting listening to somebody's stories and histories, and then they say things to you like, oh gosh, I'd forgotten all about that, or I never meant to tell you that, or I'm only ordinary, and then you realize they're anything but ordinary. They're often extraordinary.
Wow. Yes, it must
I'm
be
also a great procrastinator as well, so when I'm out interviewing people, I'm not writing, so it's great. A great method of procrastination.
You're gathering material, it's working.
Exactly.
But that sounds like powerful encounters that you had with people. It's
Oh yeah, I mean, it's been life-changing for me, absolutely, you know, life-changing to see and uncover these extraordinary women and the way they operated, and you know, there are certain things that you hear that I would always hear time and again. You know, what little we had, we shared. We lived collectively, not individually, and families are as close as friends. And you realise that these women were often a sort of paradox. You know, a lot of these women were incredibly tough. You know, I often heard people recounting tales of seeing their mum fighting it, slugging it out with fists on the street for pride, for honour, but also immense kindness and compassion. And there was a real sense of you helped out those people in your community because it was only by default that you could be there yourself. So you had a duty of care to the vulnerable within your community, because God knows next time it could be you that might not be able to feed your kids or pay the tallyman or pay the rent for your house. So enormous kindness, I think, and a sense of duty towards your community. And it's sort of, I felt like we could really learn a lot from that today in the 21st century, actually.
Lessons.
People lived as we, not I.
Lessons from the past.
Always. Well, there's always history tells us everything. I mean, I was only the other day, it was really interesting, I was writing a piece for a magazine about people sheltering in the underground, and I saw this extraordinary photo of people from Ukraine sleeping in the underground. You only have to look at the past to see nothing is really that new.
That is very, very true. Hopefully we'll be able to take up the right lessons from what we lived.
I hope.
Yeah. we shall see.
I'll see.
Did you ever met someone whose life was so extraordinary you wanted to devote an entire book?
Oh, all of them, yeah. All of them, yeah. I mean, I always talk about this lady. One of my favourite women from the book is a Jewish lady called B.T. Orwell, who was born in what was the Jewish sort of quarter of Whitechapel. And Beatty Orwell was born on the 7th of the 7th, 1917. So she was born when the First World War was still going on. And she's now 104. She's coming up to her 105th birthday.
Wow.
And she still lives in Bethnal Green. She'll never leave. And she's an extraordinary woman. She became an anti-fascist at the age of 19, she said, because she couldn't dance. So she used to go and join the anti-fascists, and she stood up at the Battle of Cable Street. And then during the Second World War, she packed munitions and worked as a postwoman. And then post-war, she became the first lady, one of the first lady mayoresses of Bethnal Green, and fought really hard for community housing. So she's a pioneer, an absolute pioneer. And I return to her often, and I love just going to sit with her and have a cup of tea. She's razor sharp still, almost 105. And I love being with her because she's just she's got this extraordinary presence and led such a life. And she showed me how to live a life fearlessly and to stand up for your principles. And so I could have written a whole book just on Beatty Orwell alone.
Wow.
And all of the women, in truth, you know.
Yeah. That's amazing. Are you working on your next book at the moment, or do you have any ideas for what you want to write?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So the Little Wartime Library, which is out now, obviously, but then just before COVID broke out, actually, I went to the Jersey Literary Festival, and I visited this fascinating place called the Jersey War Tunnels. And and obviously Jersey, like in common with all the Channel Islands, was occupied. It was the only part of the British Isles to be occupied by the Germans during the Second World War. So immediately it makes it much more fascinating because people were living with the enemy. There's a real sense of jeopardy there. But I did see this, and it was just a fascinating story. It was only on a little sort of plaque, I suppose, if you like, as part of the exhibition at the War Tunnels. And it was about the post office during the Second World War, during the occupation, and what the people at the post office used to do is during the Second War, there was this horrible culture of people denouncing their neighbours to the German authorities.
Yeah.
It was the same in France. You know, you always had the people they called the collaborators, I guess.
Yeah.
And so what the people at the post office did is they used to steam open any letters that were addressed to the German High Command. And they would read, and if it said, oh, my neighbour Betty has got a wireless hidden in her basement, they would steam open, and they would, on their rounds, cycling around on their bikes, delivering letters, they'd have a knock and a quiet word, and they would give that person 48 hours to get rid of their wireless, or sometimes the ramifications were much more. People were helping to hide escaped Russian slaves or so forth. And then they would go back, and in 24 hours time they would seal it up again, date stamp it, and send it on. And in this way they must have saved hundreds of lives.
Wow.
And it's so not acknowledged. So I thought, I want my target is to be a postwoman, steaming open letters and informing people and helping to subvert the regime in her own quiet way. Yeah, wow. There's loads of jeopardy and drama there that could unfold. So that's why I've been to the Channel. I've been to Jersey 3 or 4 times now, and in the same way that I researched at the East End, there are so many people who feel their stories haven't really been told. There's this rhetoric, I suppose, or narrative that the Channel Islands was an easy occupation, when in reality it wasn't. Many people did end up in camps and imprisoned in concentration camps. So that's a story I really want to tell. So that's coming up next. Wow. Well, I'm also really excited for that. Well, I'll come back on that one, shall I? If you'll have me. Yeah, I'm going to read the Little Wartime Library first, and then But I've got to say, Marion, as well, I'm really grateful to you, because I interviewed you for the Wartime Library. I made it my mission to interview 100 librarians to celebrate 100 years of Bethnal Green Library. So I'm really grateful to you, because actually I know a lot of the librarians I'm interviewing now weren't around during the Second World War, but the mechanics of librarianship has changed, but the fundamental joy of being a librarian, imparting knowledge and information and sharing a love of books and a community hub, and all of that remains the same. So through speaking to people like you, it's filled my head with stories. Yeah. Well, thank you. It was really enjoyable, and I really appreciated your interview. It was really inspiring. So if anyone reads Little Wartime Library, they'll see Marion in there. Yes, go see it. Well, thank you so much, Kate. That was really, really enjoyable. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and I know we have
planned to do a little interview in a basement at some point. I'm still really
Yeah, we thought that
happy
would be
to do that.
interesting, wouldn't we, to do it by, well, funnily enough, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going on a tour of Clapham South Underground Station. The London Transport Museum have opened up a lot of the tube tunnels and are doing tours to places you can't usually go to. And during the war, I know Clapham South was another one that hosted huge underground communities, and in the post-war years, they welcomed the immigrants on Windrush. So there was a whole subterranean community at Clapham. And maybe we could go down there and do an interview by candlelight down there for
that would be really fun.
a feel of how it was during the war years.
Let's talk about that. Well,
okay.
Thank you so much for giving a voice to all these women, and thank you for all the amazing positivity about libraries that you spread all around you. It's always really nice to see.
I have a newfound respect for library workers, so thank you for having me on.
Oh, well, I think it's a huge mutual pleasure. So thank you so much. have a lovely day, and see you soon for new adventures.
Take care. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hello again, everyone. Well, that concludes our International Women's Day Author Fair. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you discovered new books that you want to read. You can find them in our libraries, or some of them are also available as ebooks. Please let us know in the comments if you enjoyed the day. And yeah, we'll see you soon for new literary adventures. Thank you so much for staying the whole stream. And yeah, have a lovely day full of new books to read. Bye, everyone.